My hands trembled as I turned the iron key in the lock of the stone cottage deep in the Silver Pine Mountains. 4 days ago, I caught Trevor reading my private journal, the one where I documented every moment of his control, every instance of fear. He grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the bones shift and said, "You think you can leave me, Ella? You think anyone else will want a broken little Omega like you? I will hunt you down no matter where you run. You are mine." Now I was here, my life savings spent on 6 months of sanctuary. This cottage was supposed to be my hiding place from the man who spent 2 years erasing who I was. Then I heard footsteps. I spun around and froze. A man stood in the doorway, massive and intimidating, wearing dark leather armor studded with metal. Long, dark hair fell past his shoulders, but it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Amber gold, wolf eyes. He looked at me like a predator assessing prey, taking in my fear, my bruised wrist, the terror I could not hide. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, understanding, and anger on my behalf. "You are the one who rented my cottage," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "I am Ronald Blackthorne, and you, little Omega, are running from someone who hurt you." I tightened my grip on the satchel until my fingers ached, as if the worn leather could anchor me in place. The cottage smelled of cold stone, old smoke, and pine sap blown in from the mountains, but all I could really register was him. He stood only a few steps inside the doorway, broad shoulders nearly blocking the light behind him, as if the rest of the world had been shut out the moment he crossed the threshold. "I rented this place," I managed, my tongue thick and clumsy in my mouth. "For 6 months. The agency in town, they said it was available." My voice sounded too small in the stone room, swallowed by the low rafters and the heavy silence that followed. He watched me without blinking, eyes tracking the tremor in my hands, the way I clutched my bag like a shield. "They did not ask my permission," he said at last. The words were calm, but something sharp hid beneath them. "This cottage is my private retreat." I swallowed. "My retreat," I almost said. "My hiding place. The one spot on the map I thought Trevor would never find." "I can leave," I forced out, even as my pulse spiked in panic at the thought. Where would I go? I had used every coin I had to get here. I had burned my bridges so thoroughly there was nothing left but ash. He looked at me then. Really looked. Gaze sweeping over my face, my rumpled travel dress, the mud on my boots, the satchel at my side. His eyes stopped on my wrist where the cuff of my sleeve had ridden up, exposing the yellowing print of fingers around my skin. His jaw flexed. The air in the room changed, something darker and more dangerous, rising from beneath his composed surface. "Stay," he said, the word more command than suggestion. "We will discuss the rental later. First, we need to talk about who you are running from." Heat crawled up my neck. I tugged my sleeve down as if that could erase what he had seen. "I'm not." His brow arched, just slightly. The lie withered on my tongue. I turned away, pretending to fuss with the satchel, pretending I was not aware of every breath he took. The cottage was small, a hearth of blackened stone, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed tucked beneath the window. Now that he was inside, it felt like the walls had crept closer. "I don't know you," I whispered. "I'm not in the habit of telling my life story to strange men who walk into my house and inform me it's actually theirs." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes, quickly buried beneath that controlled stillness. "Fair," he said. "Then let me correct that first." He stepped forward, into the light of the single candle burning on the table. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to leather and metal and muscle, the curve of a pauldron over his shoulder, the worn straps crossing his chest, the faint scars along his forearms. He looked like he had stepped out of one of the old stories my grandmother used to tell, the kind where warriors strode through blood and fire without flinching. "I am Ronald Blackthorne," he said. "Alpha of the Blackthorne Pack, King of the Northern Territories." The words hit me like cold water. Alpha. King. I had grown up hearing those titles whispered like distant storms. Alphas ruled local packs. Kings ruled clusters of them, entire stretches of land. They were the ones the elders invoked when they talked about laws and borders and the old ways. The Alpha King was a legend, not someone who appeared in your doorway because a rental agent forgot to send a letter. "You're joking," I said weakly. Ronald tilted his head slightly. "Do I look like a man who jokes about his rank?" No. He looked like a man who had ordered armies and been obeyed. Like a man who could snap necks with one hand and sleep soundly afterward. I took a step back, until the edge of the table pressed into my spine. Then, this entire mountain range, belongs to my pack, he finished. Every valley, every ridge, every path, including this cottage, including the road you took to reach it. My throat went dry. If he owned all of it, then the moment I crossed the border into these mountains, I had stepped into his territory, into his awareness. Omegas like me were supposed to keep our heads down and move quietly through the world. We were not meant to wander into an Alpha King's retreat and start claiming it as our own. I didn't know, I said. The agency didn't say. I am aware. His voice softened a fraction. The woman who handles my human side business is getting an earful tomorrow. Beneath the irritation, I sensed something else. Curiosity. Wariness. A thread of something that felt startlingly like concern. He inhaled, slow and deep, as if tasting the air. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. Wolves read more than scent when they did that. They read mood, health, fear, secrets. Ella Whitmore, he said, my name rolling off his tongue like he had known it for years. You smell like rosemary and mountain rain. And fear. I flinched. Stop doing that, I snapped before I could think better of it. Stop reading me. One corner of his mouth twitched, but he inclined his head in acknowledgement. Then answer me instead. Who hurt you? Trevor's face flashed behind my eyes, his practiced smile, his soft hands that never had to work as hard as mine, the way they turned to iron around my wrists when I tried to pull away. It doesn't matter, I whispered. He's not here. Yet, Ronald said quietly. The single word sliced through the fragile bubble of denial I had built around myself on the journey here. Trevor had said he would hunt me. I had believed distance and secrecy would be enough. I had not accounted for the fact that the man I was running from collected favors the way other men collected coins. Ronald studied me for a long moment. Then he moved past me, crossing to the heavy wooden desk tucked beneath the far wall. He opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek black device that looked wildly out of place against the rough-hewn furniture. A phone, a very expensive one. He pressed a button and lifted it to his ear. His voice when he spoke dropped into something colder, edged with command. June, he said. I need you to run a check on someone. Human, female, Ella Whitmore. Came into our territory 4 days ago. My heart slammed against my ribs. What are you doing? He held up a hand, signaling for silence. Yes, he continued. I want everything. Birth records, employment, known associates, and I want a list of any male connected to her with a history of violence. Anyone who might have put bruises on her wrist. He glanced at me as he said it, eyes flicking to the cuff of my sleeve again. Heat flared up my spine, anger, humiliation, something sharp and raw that felt too much like hope. Start with a Trevor Marsh, Ronald added. He smells like entitlement and cheap cologne. Despite everything, a broken laugh escaped me. You are unbelievable, I said. He ended the call and set the phone down with quiet finality. You came into my land injured and afraid, he said. That makes you my responsibility. I didn't ask for that, I protested. I did not ask for you to rent my cottage, he countered. Yet here you are. He took a step closer, and I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. There was nothing soft in his expression, but there was no cruelty either. Only a fierce, steady certainty that made my knees feel weak. You can leave if you wish, he said. I will not cage you. But understand this, Ella. Whatever you are running from is already on my radar now, and I do not tolerate hunters in my territory. My breath caught. The room seemed to hum around us, the crackle of the fire, the distant wind pressing against the shuttered windows, the steady thud of my heart in my ears. For the first time since I fled, I realized Trevor might not be the most dangerous man in my story anymore. And for the first time, I wondered if that might actually be a good thing. Ronald came back with the dawn. I knew it was him before I opened the door. His scent, pine resin, cold night air, and something darker, wilder, slipped through the cracks in the wood, a heartbeat before his knock. When I tugged the door open, he was standing there with an armful of split logs and a burlap sack slung over one broad shoulder, as if hauling half a forest before breakfast was the most natural thing in the world. I brought wood, he said simply, and food. I didn't ask you to. My voice came out thin and scratchy from a night of too little sleep and too many thoughts. "I noticed," he replied, stepping past me as though he owned not just the cottage but the ground beneath it. "Technically, he did. You also did not ask the fire to go out, yet it did." He glanced at the cold ashes in the hearth. "You will need more than stubbornness to survive these mountains." He didn't wait for permission. He crossed to the fireplace, set the logs down with a solid thud, and began to rebuild the fire. Every movement was efficient, economical, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. Kindling stacked just so, larger logs arranged to catch quickly. Flint struck once, twice, until sparks leapt to life. Within moments, flames licked up the wood, and warmth began to chase the night chill from the room. I hovered near the table, arms folded over my chest. "I can take care of myself," I said, sharper than I meant to. The words were an instinct now, the armor I put on whenever someone reached too close. Ronald paused, then straightened slowly. When he turned, the new fire threw his face into planes of light and shadow, bronzing his skin, gilding the edges of his dark hair. His amber eyes found mine and held. "I am sure you can," he said quietly. "But that does not mean you should have to." Something in my chest twisted. I looked away first, focusing on the burlap sack he'd brought. "What's in there?" He dropped it onto the table. The smell of fresh bread and smoked meat drifted out when he loosened the knot. Cheese wrapped in waxed cloth, a jar of honey, a paper packet of dried tea leaves. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I hadn't realized how thin my provisions really were until abundance sat on my table like an accusation. "I'll pay you back," I muttered. "Already handled." He shrugged. "The pack keeps stores for winter. Consider it a welcome tax for trespassing in my retreat." I scowled, unsure if he was teasing or declaring some new law. His mouth quirked at the corner, like he'd heard the question and decided not to answer it. The morning passed in a strange kind of truce. Ronald moved around the cottage with the comfortable ease of someone who knew every creak of the floorboards, repairing a loose hinge on the back door, checking the shutters, carrying in extra wood for the stack by the hearth. I brewed tea and pretended I wasn't watching him while I did it. He never asked for my story again, but I could feel his curiosity like a pressure in the room, quiet and controlled. When his phone buzzed once in the inner pocket of his armor, he stepped outside to take the call, leaving the door open just enough for cold air and curiosity to slip through. I told myself I wouldn't listen. Of course I did. "Report," his voice carried, low and edged with that command that made my bones want to obey. A pause. "No, she doesn't appear to know. Yes, that's her name. Ella Whitmore. Human records only do not alert the council. I will handle it." My stomach flipped. He was already digging into my life, my past, while I stood in his house wearing his charity and pretending I wasn't shaking. By midday, clouds had rolled in, turning the light outside the window flat and silver. I was rinsing cups at the basin when a chorus of distant howls rose from the forest, sharp and layered. The sound crawled over my skin, goosebumps prickling along my arms. Ronald's head snapped toward the door. "Stay here," he said, and in that moment there was no room for argument. His voice was pure alpha steel wrapped in velvet. The howls came closer, not wild and chaotic, but patterned, disciplined. I moved to the window despite his order, fingers bunching in my skirts. Through the wavy glass, I saw them emerge from the trees. 3 wolves, their coats shades of gray and black, moving with purpose across the clearing. They shifted at the edge of the yard, bodies rising, stretching, reshaping, until 3 naked men stood in the snow-dusted grass. Before I could look away, Ronald opened the door and stepped out, blocking my view like a deliberate shield. One of the men tossed him a folded bundle from a satchel clothes. I realized belatedly. All 3 of them lowered their heads in unison. "My king," the tallest said, voice carrying easily. "Border Patrol reports no unusual activity. The northern ridge is secure, no sign of rogues." "My king." The words rang in my ears louder than the howls. Ronald acknowledged the report with a nod, the barest flick of his fingers, sending them back to their patrol. It was as casual as a man waving off servants, except these men were warriors, and they looked at him like he hung the moon. He turned then and caught me watching through the glass. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, the Alpha King outside in the gray light, the lone Omega inside his cottage, clutching a damp cup with shaking fingers. I opened the door before he could knock. "You're the Alpha King," I whispered, even though he'd already told me. It sounded different now, with his pack bowing to him still echoing in the air. It sounded real. He stepped back inside, fastening the last button on his shirt, armor abandoned on a peg by the door. Without it, he somehow looked more dangerous. Less legend, more man. "I am," he said simply. No boast, no apology. "And the words tasted like gravel. "I'm just a lone omega who rented the wrong cottage." His gaze softened, but only a little. "You are a lone omega with no pack protection running from someone dangerous," he corrected. "Which means you are now under my protection. Whether you want it or not." The room tilted. "That is not how this works," I protested. "You don't just claim people." "I did not say you belong to me," he replied, the faintest edge entering his tone. "I said you are under my protection. There is a difference. One Trevor Marsh will learn very quickly." Hearing Trevor's name in his mouth felt like having a locked box forced open. "You had no right to look into my life. You barely know me. And he had no right to put those bruises on your wrist," Ronald shot back, eyes flaring gold. "Yet here we are." Silence fell heavy between us. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like impatient fingers. Inside, my heartbeat thudded loud enough to count. "Why do you care?" I asked finally, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "You could have thrown me out the moment you realized I was here. You could have sent your wolves to escort me back to town and washed your hands of me." His expression changed then, something old and hurt flickering beneath the surface. He moved to the hearth, staring into the flames as if they showed him another time, another place. 5 years ago," he said quietly. "My younger sister Mira was killed by her mate." The world narrowed to the crackle of the fire and the rough cadence of his voice. "She was stubborn," he continued. "Brave. She loved hard and forgave too easily. When she chose him, we all saw the charm, the promises. We did not see the way he isolated her. Not until she stopped visiting, stopped writing, stopped smiling. My throat closed. I could picture it too easily, a bright girl dimming, excuses layered over bruises. "Mira believed she could fix him," Ronald said. "That if she loved him enough, he would change. By the time she realized love is not a cure for rot, it was too late." He fell silent. The fire snapped, throwing sparks up the chimney. "What happened?" I asked, already knowing the answer would hurt. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "He killed her. Claimed it was an accident. Claimed she shifted wrong. Claimed he could not stop himself. The council debated. The pack mourned. And I," his voice roughened, "I realized all my power, all my titles, meant nothing if I could not protect the one person who needed me most." A hot sting burned behind my eyes. I blinked hard. "When I look at you," he said, finally turning to face me, "I see her, not her face, her fear, her stubbornness, her refusal to ask for help even as she drowns." I wrapped my arms around myself, not sure if I was holding myself together or keeping his words out. "I will not," he said, each word deliberate, "fail again." I wanted to say it wasn't his responsibility, that I wasn't his sister, that he owed me nothing. But the words tangled with the image of Trevor's hand bruising my wrist, his voice hissing in my ear that no one would believe me if I ran. "Protection has a cost," I said instead. "Alphas don't do anything for free." Something like a smile ghosted over his lips, humorless and sharp. "The cost," he said, "is that you do not make it easy for the man hunting you. You stay where I can keep you safe. You tell me when he reaches out. You let me do what I should have done for Mira." "And if I refuse?" I asked. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint gold ring around his pupils, the tiny scar at the corner of his mouth, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. "Then you walk out that door," he said softly, "and I will still hunt him for daring to cross into my land and lay hands on what he thought was helpless. But you will be alone when he comes." Again. The choice hung between us, heavy and impossible. I thought of rough hands and whispered threats. Of nights lying awake, planning my escape down to the last coin. Of the way my bones had stopped shaking only when Ronald's wolves howled outside, the sound strange but weirdly comforting. Slowly, I exhaled. "I don't like being told what to do," I said. "I know," he replied. I heard it in every word you threw at me this morning. I don't trust alphas. Good, he said. You shouldn't, not easily. I met his gaze, searching for the trap, the hidden hook. All I saw was a man balanced on the edge of his own ghosts, offering me shelter in spite of them. Fine, I whispered. For now, I'll stay. I'll let you help. Something eased in his shoulders, so subtle I might have imagined it. Wise choice, he murmured. June will have your file soon. When he does, we start planning. Planning what? He moved past me to the door, hand on the latch, eyes scanning the tree line out of habit. How to make sure, he said, that the next time Trevor Marsh so much as thinks your name, it hurts. 1 week into life in the cottage, the mountains started to sound less like a threat and more like a lullaby. Morning settled into a rhythm I almost trusted. I woke to birdsong and the distant rush of the river instead of slammed doors and shouted accusations. I brewed tea over the hearth, the steam curling into the chill air while pale light spilled through the small window above the sink. Most days I half expected the front door to fly open and Trevor to storm in, snarling that I'd stolen his mug, his time, his peace. Instead, it was Ronald who appeared. He never knocked more than once, one low, solid rap of his knuckles. Then he waited, patient in that infuriatingly calm way of his. He always brought something fresh meat from a hunt, jars of preserved vegetables from pack stores, thick wool blankets accidentally left on my chair. I stopped arguing about the supplies when I realized he would simply ignore any attempt to pay him back. He checked the wards he'd laced around the property too, invisible threads of power that hummed faintly along the tree line. I couldn't see them, but I felt them sometimes, like a soft pressure at the edge of my awareness. When he walked the perimeter, his expression went hard and distant, all alpha and no man. The strange part was how quickly I got used to him being there. I started to recognize the sound of his footsteps on the path, the way his weight shifted the old wood of the porch. I told myself the flutter low in my stomach when he stepped through the door was leftover fear, not anticipation. I told myself I liked the silence better when he was gone, but the cottage felt too big on the days he stayed away. He talked about pack territory while he worked about the northern ridge where the snow didn't fully melt even in summer, about the hot springs hidden deep in the forest, about old treaty lines carved into stone. I listened with my hands wrapped around a mug, pretending I wasn't memorizing every detail like someone might quiz me later. You're learning fast, he said once, after I correctly pointed out the direction of the nearest border on his crudely sketched map. Fear is a good teacher, I replied. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, longer than necessary, like he wanted to argue. Then he let it go. For the first time in years, I slept through the night more than once. The nightmares still came, but they blurred at the edges, losing their sharpness. When I woke now, it was to the sound of wolves howling somewhere out in the dark, layered voices weaving into something that felt less like danger and more like a promise. You are not alone. I almost believed it. On the 8th morning, the illusion shattered. It was a quiet day. Snow clouds pressed low over the mountain, muting the world. Ronald was away at some pack council, his last words at the door, a low warning. If anything feels wrong, you call me. Immediately. He'd tapped his phone, then the silver charm at my throat, as if both were equally capable of summoning him. Nothing feels wrong, I'd wanted to tell him. That was the problem. I didn't know how to live without wrongness humming in my bones. I spent the morning sorting herbs at the table, laying out bundles of dried lavender and yarrow, grinding willow bark into fine powder. It was satisfying work, simple and familiar. My hands knew what to do even when my thoughts wandered. I almost didn't hear the soft thump on the porch. The wards didn't flare. No footsteps crunched in the snow. Just that one dull sound, like something had been dropped and whoever dropped it had vanished. My skin prickled. Slowly, I set down the pestle and wiped my hands on my apron. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But curiosity was a stubborn, reckless thing, and it had kept me alive as often as it had put me in danger. I opened the door. A single envelope lay on the wooden planks, already dusted with a fine layer of snow. No one stood on the path. The forest beyond the clearing was still and silent, the trees watching like they knew something I didn't. A faint, unfamiliar scent lingered in the air, Wolf, but not one I recognized. Rougher, unaligned. Rogue. I snatched the envelope up and slammed the door shut, my heart punching against my ribs, my fingers cramped around the thick paper, the edges digging into my skin. Don't open it, some quiet, reasonable part of me whispered. Burn it. Throw it into the fire and never know. But there was another part. The one that had stayed with Trevor long after the first warning bells. The part that always needed to see, to understand, to have proof. I turned the envelope over. My name stared back at me in tight, familiar handwriting. Ella. The room tilted. My vision narrowed to the loops and slashes of ink, the way the E hooked just slightly at the top, the way the A leaned too far forward. I had watched Trevor write that way on grocery lists, on love notes he left on my pillow after particularly cruel arguments. On the lease, he'd insisted be in his name alone. My stomach lurched. I tore the envelope open with clumsy fingers. The first line punched the air from my lungs. Did you really think you could hide from me, little Omega? The words swam on the page. I forced myself to keep reading. I have friends in the supernatural world, friends who owe me favors. I know you are in the Silver Pine Mountains. I know you are alone. It is only a matter of time before I come to collect what belongs to me. You can run all you want, but you know how this ends. You always come back to me. Doe. For a long moment, I just stood there, the letter shaking in my hands, the edges cut into my fingers, but I barely felt it. He knew. He knew I was in the mountains. He had found the territory at least, if not the exact cottage. Somehow, some way, he had wrung information out of someone, charmed them, threatened them, bought them. Trevor never paid for anything with his own blood when someone else's would do. A sound escaped me. It might have been a laugh, or a sob, or both. I folded, knees hitting the rough floorboards, the letter crumpling as my hands spasmed. The cottage, my sanctuary, blurred at the edges. The stone walls closed in until all I could see was Trevor's sneer. All I could hear was his voice whispering in my ear. You always come back. I didn't hear the door open. I felt the rush of cold air and the impression of a shadow falling over me. Ella. Ronald's voice cut through the panic like a blade. I looked up. He must have come straight from wherever he'd been, still in dark traveling clothes, snow dusting his boots, the wind clinging to his hair. His gaze dropped to the letter in my fist, then to my face. Give it to me, he said gently. My fingers refused at first, locked in a death grip. He crouched in front of me, large hands covering mine, warmth seeping into my chilled skin. He didn't pry the letter away. He simply waited, letting me feel the solid weight of him, the reality of the cottage around us. Slowly, my grip loosened. He slid the paper free and stood, unfolding it with a single motion. His eyes flicked back and forth as he read. With each line, his expression darkened, the air around him thickening, crackling with contained fury. When he reached the end, his jaw clenched. The letter made a dry, ugly sound as he crushed it in his fist. He used a rogue to deliver this, Ronald said, voice dangerously calm. Smart enough not to come himself. Coward smart. I pushed myself upright, leaning against the table for support. He knows I'm here, I whispered. He's coming. He knows you are in the mountains, Ronald corrected. That is not the same as knowing where you sleep, what wards surround you, whose territory you are under. It doesn't matter, I said. He always finds a way. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides and caught my chin, tilting my face up to his. His touch was firm, not cruel. His eyes burned molten gold. Listen to me, Ella, he said. He will not touch you. Not while you are in my territory. Not while I draw breath. Something in his tone, steady, absolute, slipped past my defenses and hooked deep. You can't promise that, I whispered. I just did. His fingers brushed my jaw, a fleeting, grounding touch. Trevor Marsh believes you are alone. That is his first mistake. His second was sending rogues into my lands. I do not forgive trespasses. Fear still coiled in my stomach, but another feeling rose to meet it, sharp and unfamiliar. Hope. Ronald turned toward the door, already pulling his phone from his pocket. June, he said when the line connected. We have confirmation. He used rogues. I want every unaligned wolf within 50 miles accounted for by sundown. And find me anyone boasting about a human named Trevor with too much money and not enough sense. He glanced back at me, his gaze softer now, though the anger simmered beneath it. "Go sit by the fire," he said. "Breathe. I'll be back once I've reminded the mountains who they belong to." "He will not touch you," he'd said. For the first time since Trevor's shadow fell across my life, I dared to believe someone might actually be able to keep that promise. Ronald's promise didn't stay just words. By the next morning, the forest around the cottage felt different. I couldn't see anyone when I stepped onto the porch, but the hair on my arms lifted, my omega instincts whispering watched. Not stalked the way Trevor used to watch me from doorways and mirrors, but monitored, measured like the territory itself had opened its eyes. Ronald called them wards and patrols. I called them breathing room. He stationed guards along the tree line, warriors who melted into shadow and snowfall. Sometimes I caught a flicker of movement between the pines, the glint of eyes that dipped respectfully when they realized I was looking. They never came closer than the clearing. "This," Ronald said, "was my space." He backed that up in a way that left no room for argument. His things appeared in the cottage's second room, one by one, a stack of neatly folded clothes on the chest at the foot of the bed, a razor on the washstand, a heavy leather belt hanging from the back of a chair. No grand announcement, just quiet, immovable evidence. "You moved in," I said that first night, eyeing the extra pair of boots by the door. He shrugged, unbothered. "I will not leave you unprotected while he is out there," he said, as if it were obvious. "If you wish, I will sleep on the floor." I should have told him to go back to his grand Alpha King mansion or whatever fortress he usually slept in. I should have insisted that I was fine, that I had survived worse alone. Instead, I picked up the second mug and poured more tea. At night, when I lay in my narrow bed, I could hear him in the other room. His footsteps paced a short, restless path from door to window to hearth and back again. Sometimes the floorboards groaned under the weight of his frustration. Sometimes I heard the soft, low rumble of a growl, quickly cut off, like his wolf was pacing with him, pressed hard against the surface of his skin. Oddly, it soothed me. I had spent so long straining to hear if Trevor was awake, if he was angry, if tonight would be one of the nights he picked at my every word until I could barely think. Ronald's pacing was different. It said, "I am here." It said, "Nothing will slip past me while you sleep." My body started to believe it before my mind did. The change came on a cold evening when the wind howled around the cottage and snow hissed against the shutters like whispered threats. Ronald had tended the fire until it roared, the orange light painting the stone walls in flickering warmth. I sat cross-legged on the hearth rug with a basket of mending at my side, pretending to focus on a torn shirt while my attention kept drifting to the man in the armchair across from me. He looked almost relaxed, one arm draped over the back of the chair, long legs stretched toward the fire. He'd stripped down to a simple dark shirt and trousers, but even without the armor, there was nothing soft about him. The flames carved shadows along his cheekbones, caught in the amber ring around his pupils. He was talking about something pack succession laws, maybe, or a story about a young warrior who'd tried to challenge him and regretted it halfway through the first punch. His voice rolled low and steady, filling the room, wrapping around me like another blanket. I laughed at something, he said, the sound surprising me with how easy it felt. The laugh shivered through the air, bounced off stone and flame, and then something tugged inside my chest. It was subtle at first, a gentle pull just beneath my sternum, like an invisible thread had hooked into me. Warmth spread outward, seeping into my ribs, my spine, my fingertips. I inhaled sharply, and the air tasted different, sharper, richer, saturated with him. I looked up. Ronald had stopped talking mid-sentence. His gaze locked onto mine, pupils blown wide, the amber almost swallowed by molten black. The firelight caught his eyes and turned them into twin suns. The pull tightened. It wasn't just emotional, wasn't just attraction or gratitude. It was something older, deeper, a current of energy that flowed from him to me and back again, humming like a live wire. I felt his presence everywhere in the warmth of the room, in the beat of my own heart, in the way my skin tingled as if expecting a touch that hadn't come yet. The stories I'd heard as a child rushed back all at once. Fated mates, threads of moon magic tying souls together, bonds that could heal or destroy. No. I snatched my gaze away, fingers digging into the fabric in my lap. Panic flared, cold and sharp, cutting through the heat. No, no, no. I can't, I whispered, the words tearing out of me before I could stop them. I cannot do this. The air shifted. Ronald moved, the chair creaking as he leaned forward. Ella, I can't belong to anyone ever again, I said, louder now, the old fear roaring back up like a wave. I just got out. I just learned how to breathe without asking permission first. I can't be tied bound to an alpha king of all people. I can't. You would not belong to me, he cut in, voice low but firm. I forced myself to look at him. His eyes glowed in the firelight, the amber ring bright, wolf close enough to taste. But there was no hunger there, no possessive greed, only a fierce, aching steadiness. You would belong with me, he continued. There is a difference. My chest heaved. It doesn't feel like a difference. That is because every bond you have known so far has been a cage, he said. Trevor twisted the idea of together into ownership. That is not what this is. He tapped his chest, then gestured loosely toward me. A mate bond is not chains, Ella. It is a bridge, two people choosing to meet in the middle. Equals. Equals, I echoed, almost bitter. You're an alpha king. I'm a lone omega who can barely keep her hands from shaking. You are a healer with more spine than sense, he said without hesitation. You ran without a pack, without money, without guarantees. You walked into unknown territory on sheer stubbornness and a handful of herbs. Do not insult yourself by pretending that is weakness. Heat burned behind my eyes. I looked away, studying the pattern in the rug so I didn't have to see whatever was in his expression. The pull in my chest hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled into a steady thrum, syncing with my heartbeat. Every time he shifted, it tugged, like an invisible line connecting us. It terrified me how much my body liked it, how safe it felt, how right. I'm not ready, I said finally, voice small. I don't know if I ever will be. I am not asking you to decide tonight, he replied, or tomorrow, or next month. I heard him stand, felt the air disturb as he crossed the space between us. He knelt so we were almost eye to eye, though I still had to tilt my chin up. I am only asking you to let it be, to not run from it before you understand what it truly is. What if it takes away who I am? I whispered. What if I disappear into you the way I disappeared into him? His gaze softened, something raw and vulnerable flickering there. If this bond makes you smaller, he said, then I will tear it out of my own chest. I blinked. You can't. He gave a faint, humorless smile. No, but I would try. Silence stretched between us, thick but not suffocating. May I? He asked then, reaching into the inner pocket of his shirt. I nodded, more curious than afraid now. He pulled out a small silver charm on a thin chain. It was simple, an oval disc etched with delicate runes, edges worn soft with age. When he placed it in my palm, it was warm, as if it had been pressed against skin for a long time. My sister wore this, he said quietly. Mira. Our mother carved the runes herself the day she was born. Protection, strength, clarity. His throat worked around the words. I could not save her, but I can give this to you. I stared at the charm, the metal catching the firelight, throwing tiny sparks across my skin. My chest tightened around that strange new thread connecting me to him, to his grief, to his hope. I can't take this, I said. It's all you have left of her. He shook his head. What I have left of her is the promise I made on her grave, that I would never again stand by while a man broke a woman under the guise of love. Letting this sit in a drawer does not honor that. Letting it protect you does. Slowly, my fingers curled around the charm. The runes pressed into my palm, sharp and comforting all at once. Come, he murmured. He took the chain gently from my hand and moved behind me, his fingers brushing the nape of my neck as he fastened it. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, the mate bond humming in approval. I closed my eyes against the intensity of it. The charm settled against my skin, cool for a heartbeat, then warm, as if it recognized its new place. Maybe, he said softly, it will keep you safer than it kept her. I turned my head enough to see him over my shoulder. His face was close, his eyes no longer glowing but still bright. Ronald, I said, his name feeling different with the charm against my throat. Yes? I'm still scared. I know. He stepped back, giving me space. We will go as slowly as you need. And if the bond is nothing more than a thread for now, that is enough. You owe me nothing." The thread tugged, gentle as a promise. I lifted the charm with trembling fingers, letting it fall back against my collarbone. For the first time, the idea of belonging with someone didn't feel entirely like a threat. It felt dangerously close to hope. I told him everything. It started as a trickle, a few careful sentences meant to satisfy his questions, and then somewhere between the first bruise and the last lie, it turned into a flood I couldn't stop. We sat by the fire, the cottage dim except for the orange light licking at the stone, shadows moving over Ronald's face while I picked my history apart, like a wound that had never been allowed to heal. I told him how Trevor had found me at the market clinic, all charm and easy smiles, pretending to be fascinated by my salves and teas. How he brought me coffee and listened to me ramble about herbs and patience, and the way the moon tugged at wolves' moods. How he said all the right things about strong women and independence until the day he didn't. I told him how the change came quietly. A suggestion to close the clinic earlier, for my safety. A frown when I gave discounted remedies to a struggling pack mother. A complaint that I spent more time with clients than with him. Little things that sounded like concern when he said them. Reasonable when I tried to argue with myself later. I told him about the questions that never seemed to end. Where are you going? Who are you seeing? Why didn't you answer your phone? Why did you smile at that male wolf? Why do you need to work when I can provide for you? Ronald's gaze stayed on me, steady and unflinching. The only sound in the room was the fire and my voice, thin and shaking but relentless. He started reading my journals, I said, fingers tangled in the hem of my dress. The ones my grandmother told me to keep. Records of patience, of remedies that worked and failed, but also, I swallowed. Also the ones where I wrote about being afraid, about him, about how wrong it felt. My throat burned. He would quote lines back to me word for word in arguments. He'd say, "You wrote this, Ella. You said you overreact. You said you're too sensitive." And because they were my words, it felt like proof. I stopped trusting my own head. Ronald's eyes flickered, a flash of molten gold in the dim light before he forced them back to human brown. His jaw worked once, then stilled. I kept going. I told him how Trevor insisted on handling our money, so I wouldn't have to worry, until I found myself asking permission to buy herbs I used to collect without thinking. How he showed up unannounced at the clinic, hovering in doorways, listening to every conversation, making my clients uncomfortable until some stopped coming entirely. He told me they were using me, I whispered. That they didn't respect me. That I was too naive to see how they took advantage. I told him about the last friend I had left, a fellow healer named May, and how Trevor slowly poisoned that too. Little comments, jokes about May's motives, suggestions that she had feelings for me I'd never noticed, that she wanted to break us up out of jealousy. Eventually, I stopped answering her messages, I said. It was easier than listening to him accuse me every time my phone buzzed. By the time I reached the final night, my voice was raw. I came home early, I said. My hands moved without my permission, miming the old motions, the key in the lock, the bag sliding from my shoulder. He didn't hear me at first. He was in the bedroom, sitting at my desk with my journal open and my phone in his hand. I could still see it, the way he'd looked up, not surprised or guilty, just annoyed at being interrupted. He told me he'd found a new entry, I continued, the one where I planned my escape. The memory slammed into me with full force. My chest tightened, the room blurred at the edges. I said he had no right, I whispered. That it was my private writing, my life. I told him I was leaving. My fingers slid unconsciously to my wrist, to the lingering yellow marks just beneath the charm Ronald had given me. He laughed, I said. Then he grabbed me, hard. I heard something crack. He pushed me against the wall and said, the words caught in my throat like splinters. He said, "You think you can walk away from me, little Omega? You belong to me. No one else will put up with you. You'll come crawling back like you always do." Silence swallowed the cottage. Ronald hadn't moved while I spoke, but now I could feel the tension boiling off him. His hands were clenched on his knees, knuckles pale, tendons stark. His eyes flickered again, brown flashing to bright, dangerous amber and back, as if his wolf kept slamming itself against the bars of his control. "And the bruises?" he asked, voice low and careful. "From him pulling me away from the door when I tried to leave," I said, From him shaking me. From when he shoved me onto the bed and told me I wasn't thinking clearly. That we just needed to talk. I forced myself to meet his gaze. I got away when he went to answer a call. Climbed out the window, took the money I'd hidden, and ran. The last word came out as a gasp, more than a sound. For a moment, I thought Ronald might break something. The table, the chair, the world. He stood suddenly, the armchair scraping back. The firelight turned him into a dark, furious silhouette. He didn't speak at first. He walked to the window, shoulders rigid, hands fisting and flexing at his sides as he stared out into the forest. The wards hummed faintly in the distance, answering something in him. When he did speak, his voice was quieter than I expected, but it vibrated with barely leashed fury. "Tomorrow," he said. "I am sending trackers to find out everything about Trevor Marsh. Where he is, who he is working with, what his plans are, every debt he is owed, every favor he has called in." He turned his head just enough that I could see the sharp line of his profile, the set of his mouth. "And then," he continued, "I am going to make sure he understands what happens when someone threatens what is mine." Cold shock punched through the strange warmth that had been building between us. The word lodged like a stone in my chest. "Yours," I echoed, the protest leaping out before I could stop it. "I'm not yours." The last word scraped along old wounds. Belonging meant cages. Possession meant bruises. I couldn't do this again, not even with a man who had given me safety and a charm, and the first honest promise I'd heard in years. The room held its breath. Slowly, Ronald turned fully to face me. His expression was intense, yes, but not frightening. The heat in his eyes wasn't the greedy, devouring kind I knew too well. It was something fiercer, older, tempered by a grief I had only begun to understand. "No," he said, each syllable steady. "You are not mine." I exhaled, a shaky rush of air I hadn't realized I was holding. "But you are under my protection," he added. "And in my world, that is the same thing." I opened my mouth to argue, to say that protection had always come with invisible chains in my experience. He lifted a hand, not to silence me, but to reach for the stack of papers on the side table. "I had June run a preliminary search the night you arrived," he said, holding up the file. "I did not read all of it yet. I wanted to hear your story in your own words first." He unfolded the top page and scanned it, his mouth flattening. "Trevor Marsh is not just controlling," Ronald said. "He has connections to rogue packs, wolves who operate outside law and territory. He has been negotiating with them, trading favors for information." His gaze cut to me, sharp and assessing. "Information about your location." My stomach twisted. "How long?" "Months," he said. "Maybe longer." He started asking questions about healers on the border. Then about Omegas who travel alone. He paid one rogue pack in weapons to watch the roads leading into these mountains. A chill slid down my spine. I imagined rough wolves lounging in the shadows, passing my description around like a game. "If they had found you first..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ronald dropped the file onto the table with more force than necessary, the pages fanning out like accusations. "This is not just a man with hurt pride," he said. "This is a man who thinks he can twist the rules of our world to suit his obsession. He is recruiting criminals to steal you back like stolen property. That is not love. That is a threat to my territory." He took a step closer, then another, until he was near enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint shadows of old battles. "You are not an obligation I begrudgingly took on," he said, softer now. "You are a line that has been crossed, more than once. As Alpha King, I cannot ignore that. As a man who has already buried one sister because of a male like him, I will not ignore it." My eyes burned. "What if this makes things worse?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What if you going after him just proves him right? That I needed someone bigger, stronger, more powerful to fix my mistakes?" Ronald's expression gentled. The rage banked but still there, a steady heat instead of wildfire. "Needing help is not a mistake," he said. "His choice to hurt you is. His decision to keep hunting you is. This is not about proving him right. It is about proving him powerless." He reached out, then seemed to remember himself and let his hand drop halfway, giving me space to choose. I closed the distance. It was a small step, barely more than a shift of weight, but his eyes softened as if I'd crossed an ocean. He lifted his hand again, slow enough for me to see every inch of movement, and brushed his knuckles lightly against the silver charm at my throat. "Let me handle the wolves," he murmured. "Let me handle him. You focus on remembering who you were before he convinced you that you were less." "I don't know who that is anymore," I admitted. He gave a faint, almost sad smile. "Then we will find her together." He turned away then, giving me back the room, the fire, the illusion of normalcy. But the decision had already been made. Tomorrow, he would send trackers into the snow. Tomorrow, Trevor Marsh would stop being a nameless shadow on my horizon and become what he really was, prey in an Alpha King's territory. The snow had started to melt in thin, damp veins through the forest, turning the ground soft and dark beneath my boots. I liked this in-between time, when winter loosened its grip but spring hadn't yet decided to commit. The air smelled of thawing earth and pine sap, and my basket was already half full of early shoots, coltsfoot, chickweed, stubborn little nettles burning my fingers in familiar ways. For a few blessed minutes, the world was just plants and soil and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. Then I heard the growl. It rolled through the trees, low and rough, too deep to be any normal animal. Every instinct I had went rigid. The birds went silent. Even the wind held its breath. I straightened slowly, my back prickling. The wards Ronald had set hummed faintly at the edge of my awareness, but this sound had come from inside their circle, not beyond. "Ronald," I called, hating the shake in my voice. The answer was another growl, closer this time. 3 wolves stepped out from between the pines. They were massive, bigger than any pack wolves I'd ever seen, their shoulders nearly level with my chest. Coats matted, eyes bright and wrong, too sharp, too eager. Not the steady, assessing gaze I'd come to recognize in Ronald's warriors. This was hunger. This was sport. They fanned out without a word, cutting off the path back to the cottage. One on my left, one on my right, one straight ahead, all 3 sets of eyes fixed on me like I was the only thing in the world. My basket slipped from my hand, herbs spilling into the mud. "Stay back," I whispered, though my voice had no weight out here. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. My wolf small, underfed thing that it was scrabbled uselessly within me. The wolf in front of me shifted. Bones cracked, fur receded, limbs lengthened in a grotesque, practiced unfurling. A man stood where the beast had been, naked and utterly unashamed, scars crisscrossing his chest and arms like a map of bad decisions. His smile was thin and cruel, teeth too sharp even in human form. "Trevor sends his regards, little Omega," he drawled, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the last of the change. His gaze traveled slowly down my body and back up again. Like I was livestock at market. "He paid us well to bring you back, alive if possible." His smile widened, but he was not particular about the condition. My mouth went dry. The forest seemed to tilt, trees leaning in. "Run," something inside me insisted. Now, my body didn't need to be told twice. I spun on my heel and bolted into the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots clawing at my boots. Behind me, the men laughed a horrible, delighted sound, and then I heard paws slam into the earth. They were faster. Breath tore at my lungs, cold air burning my throat. Footsteps pounded closer, 4 legs, not 2, gaining with terrifying ease. Panic flared, hot and wild, but beneath it something else rose too, something that felt like cool water pouring through my veins. My magic. I'd always used it in gentle ways, steeping herbs, easing fevers, coaxing wounds to close, but the same force that could knit flesh back together could also hold it apart. My grandmother had told me that once, in a hushed tone that said it was knowledge, not instruction. Now, with death snapping at my heels, I stopped thinking and reached. The earth answered. Energy surged up from the ground, through my boots, my legs, my spine. I flung my hand back on instinct, fingers splayed, and felt it rush out of me in a low, shimmering wave. The air behind me thickened, the scent of crushed pine and iron blooming in the space between heartbeats. The first wolf hit it like a wall. A yelp split the air. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The wolf that had been closest skidded, claws tearing grooves in the soft earth as he fought the invisible resistance. The others slammed into the barrier a moment later, snarling, pushing against the unseen force that bent but didn't quite break. It slowed them. It didn't stop them. The strain dragged at my muscles, at my lungs. Holding the barrier felt like trying to push back the tide with bare hands. My steps faltered. The lead wolf's eyes met mine through the shimmering air, and I saw it there the moment he realized all he had to do was keep coming. He dug in and pushed harder. The barrier buckled. My knees hit the ground. The impact knocked the breath from me. The magic wavered, slipped, snapped. They surged forward. I curled in on myself, bracing for teeth, for claws, for the hot, tearing pain I'd spent months running from. The world exploded into movement. A black shape streaked past me, a blur of muscle and shadow. The air boomed with the force of it, like a storm breaking. A snarl ripped through the clearing, so loud it rattled my bones. Ronald. He hit the first rogue mid-leap. One moment there was a gray wolf sailing toward me, jaws open. The next there was a tangle of fur and fury as a massive black wolf collided with him. Ronald's wolf form was bigger than any of them, bigger than I'd even imagined. His coat so dark it seemed to swallow the light, eyes burning molten gold. He didn't hesitate. He didn't posture. He went for the throat. They rolled across the forest floor in a blur, snarls and yelps tearing at the air. I scrambled backward on hands and knees, heart in my throat, trying to get out of the way. The other two rogues recovered quickly. One lunged for Ronald's exposed flank, the other for me. An answering chorus of howls split the air. Shapes erupted from the trees, wolves, half a dozen at least, fur ranging from silver to deep brown. Ronald's warriors. They hit the rogues like a crashing wave, bodies slamming together in a whirl of teeth and claws. The forest became a battlefield. I pressed my back against a tree, fingers digging into the bark, forcing myself to focus on breathing. The magic inside me still hummed, overtaxed and shaky, but present. I held it close, ready to throw up another barrier if anything came near. Ronald's wolf stood out even amid the chaos. He moved with terrifying precision, every strike meant to maim, every bite to end a threat. He shook the gray lead rogue like a toy, then released him just long enough to dodge a snap from another, only to whirl and drive him into the ground. For a wild, surreal moment, I understood why wolves followed him. He wasn't just strong. He was inevitable. The fight felt like it lasted an hour and an instant. One rogue went down and didn't get up, Ronald's beta standing over him with bloody jaws. Another broke and ran, tail tucked, only to be intercepted at the edge of the ward line, dragged back, forced to submit under 3 warriors' combined weight. The scarred leader, the one who had spoken, struggled in Ronald's grip, teeth snapping uselessly at the air. Ronald's jaws were locked around the wolf's throat, not quite crushing, just holding, an obscene sort of mercy. The rogue finally went still, sides heaving. Submission. Ronald held him there for another beat, making sure the message was burned into bone and memory, before he released and stepped back, hackles high, chest heaving. His eyes swept the clearing, counting, assessing. Then they found me. He shifted. The change was fast, violent, his massive wolf body folding in on itself, reshaping until Ronald knelt naked in the snow, chest smeared with blood that wasn't his. Steam rose from his skin in the cold air. He didn't seem to notice. In 3 long strides, he was in front of me. Before I could think to protest, he pulled me into his arms. I stiffened on instinct. Old reflex. Then the reality sank in. No hands digging into my flesh, no voice in my ear telling me how stupid I'd been. Just warmth. Just the rapid thud of his heart under my cheek, faster than usual, betraying the fear he'd never admit. "You're shaking," he said roughly. Yeah, I managed, the word catching on a breathless laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. Almost being kidnapped will do that. He eased back enough to scan me, his hands surprisingly gentle as they ran over my arms, my ribs, my face, checking for wounds. His brows drew together when he reached my palms, fingers brushing the reddened skin where the magic had burned its way out. "You used your power," he murmured, a strange mix of pride and anger in his tone. "You held 3 rogues by yourself." "Not for long," I said. "They would have broken through even if you hadn't, shown up like a lunatic." A flicker of a smile ghosted over his mouth. "Then it is fortunate I make a convincing lunatic." Despite the terror still humming in my veins, I felt something else underneath, something sharp and fierce and startlingly alive. I had run. I had fought. I had not simply folded and waited for whatever fate Trevor had paid these wolves to deliver. I defended myself. I realized aloud, the words tasting strange. Yes, Ronald said. You did. The approval in his voice hit me harder than the fear had. Are you hurt? He asked again, more insistent this time. I shook my head. Just fried. The magic took a lot. His jaw tightened. We will talk about that. About how to use it without burning yourself out. But first, he turned his head, gaze cutting toward the subdued rogues. His beta stood nearby, one hand tangled in the scruff of the scarred leader's neck. The rogue's ears were flat, his body language screaming submission now, all the earlier cruelty gone. First we end this, Ronald said. A chill slid down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. What do you mean? I asked. He looked back at me, eyes hard as tempered steel. I mean, he said, that Trevor Marsh thought he could send dogs into my forest and steal what I have sworn to protect. He has escalated. So will I. The words sank in, heavy as stones. Ronald. He reached out, thumb brushing the silver charm at my throat, grounding me in a way nothing else could have. This was his warning shot, he said quietly. Now he learns that kings shoot back. I should have been terrified by the promise in his voice. Instead, watching the rogues cower in the snow and feeling the steady beat of my own heart, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Ronald didn't wait long to move. The night after the attack, the cottage filled with wolves. They came in their human forms, one after another slipping through the door with the easy familiarity of those who had followed the same alpha for years. The room that once felt too big for me suddenly felt too small for all that muscle and power, for the layered sense of fur and steel and snow. Ronald stood at the head of the rough table. No armor this time, just a dark shirt and trousers that did nothing to soften the authority rolling off him. His gaze swept the room once, and the low murmur of voices died instantly. Trevor Marsh, he said, and even his name sounded like a sentence, has declared himself an enemy of this pack. A low growl moved through the warriors, not loud but unanimous. My skin prickled. He sent rogues into our territory, Ronald continued. He offered them money and weapons to steal an omega from under our noses. He believes that because he is human, because he uses others to do his dirty work, our laws do not apply to him. He let that hang for a beat, eyes hard. He is mistaken. The words weren't shouted, but the room seemed to pulse with them. Even my bones heard. We will find him, Ronald said, and we will make it clear that Ella Whitmore is under the protection of the Alpha King. Anyone who touches her answers to me. The way he said my name in front of them did something strange to my chest. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes flick toward me where I stood near the hearth, but none lingered disrespectfully. If anything, I saw curiosity, sympathy, a few glimmers of rage that didn't belong to me. One warrior, broad-shouldered and scarred, bared his teeth. Permission to tear the human apart when we find him, my king. A few chuckles rolled through the room. Denied, Ronald said dryly. For now, we hunt with our heads as much as our teeth. Jun, a tall man with sharp features and watchful eyes, stepped forward. I recognized him from earlier glimpses. Ronald's beta, the one who always seemed to be where trouble might start. We've confirmed his presence near the southern border, Jun said, unfolding a worn map across the table. He's camping in the ravine here with what's left of the rogue pack he hired. 5 wolves, maybe 6, all unaligned, all mean. He tapped a spot uncomfortably close to the line that marked the edge of Blackthorn territory. He is planning another move, June added. We intercepted a message offering double the pay for extra hands and better teeth. My stomach turned. He's not giving up, I said, more to myself than anyone. No, Ronald agreed. He never would, not unless someone made him. The warriors shifted, the air thick with anticipation. This was what they were built for. Protect territory, follow the alpha, remove threats. I was the variable, the human-raised omega standing on the edge of their world with my heart in my throat. I cleared my throat. I'm coming with you. The room went utterly silent. Ronald's head snapped in my direction. No, I wasn't asking, I said, surprising myself with how steady it sounded. My hands shook around the edges, but the words landed clean. He is my nightmare, not yours. I need to face him. I need to see him defeated. Otherwise, I will never truly be free. His gaze locked with mine, amber eyes narrowed. For a moment, Alpha slammed against mate, authority against stubbornness. Then, to my shock, something like understanding softened his expression. "This is not a story where you need to prove your worth by walking into danger," he said. "You have already done more than enough of that." "I'm not trying to prove anything," I replied. I don't want to hear about it from a distance. I don't want to wake up every night wondering if you really stopped him, if he's still out there somewhere, waiting. I need to see him realize he can't hurt me anymore." The raw truth of it hung between us. Ronald studied me for a long, heavy moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, weighing strategy against trauma, risk against the cost of saying no. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. "You stay behind me," he said. "You do not engage him directly. You do not speak to him unless I say you can. And if I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand?" I nodded. I understand. I also knew, deep down, that if it came down to him or me, I would not run. Not anymore. He knew it too. It flickered in his eyes, a spark of reluctant respect and quiet dread. He turned back to his warriors. "June, you'll lead the flanking unit," he said. "Talon, you take high ground. I want eyes on them from the ridge before we move in. No one engages until I arrive." A chorus of yes, my king answered him. The plan came together quickly. All maps and gestures and shorthand I was only beginning to grasp. Ronald didn't exclude me, but he didn't center me either. I was part of the equation, not the focus of it. Somehow, that helped. We left at dawn 2 days later. The forest looked different when you walked through it with a pack. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken signals, snapped twigs, low whistles, a flick of fingers that meant, stop, listen, go. Wolves ran ahead in their animal forms, shadows slipping between trees, while those of us in human skin followed along narrow paths only they seemed to know. Ronald stayed near me, never more than an arm's length away. He wore his armor again, dark leather and metal snug against his broad frame, the sight of it sending an odd mix of fear and safety curling through me. His hand brushed my back once when the trail turned steep. He didn't grab, just steadied, then let go. "What if he runs?" I asked quietly as we walked. "What if he sees you and bolts?" "Then we chase him," Ronald said. "That is the thing about men like Trevor. They are good at hunting prey that won't fight back. They are very bad at being prey." We moved in near silence for hours, the world shrinking to the crunch of snow under boots and the mist of our breath. My nerves frayed at the edges, but exhaustion dulled them into a strange clarity. Step, breathe, don't trip. By mid-afternoon, the trees thinned. June materialized out of the shadows ahead, shifting smoothly from wolf to man, as if the forest had simply decided to spit him out. He didn't bother with clothes. Grabbing the spare trousers, Ronald tossed him with habitual ease. "They're in the ravine," he reported. 6 rogues, 1 human. Camp is sloppy. They've been drinking. Weapons are cheap, but there are enough of them to be a problem if they get lucky. His gaze flicked to me, then back to Ronald. "He talks big," June added. "Likes to brag about his omega." Heat rushed to my face, anger rising to meet the shame. Ronald's jaw clenched. "Positions," he said. "No one kills the human unless I give the order." "But we can hurt him," Talon said, a little too eagerly. "If he reaches for her," Ronald replied, "you do whatever you must." We approached the ravine from above, bellies to the snow, peering down through a lattice of branches. Trevor's camp sprawled sloppily across the hollow, a fire pit ringed by empty bottles, a tangle of bedrolls, weapons stuck haphazardly in the ground. Trevor stood near the fire, gesturing animatedly with a bottle in his hand, telling some story I couldn't hear from this distance. Even from above, I recognized the way he moved too loose, too confident, as if the world was just a stage built for his performance. My lungs tightened. "There he is," I whispered. The man who had read my journals, the man who had convinced me I was nothing without him, the man who had paid wolves to drag me back bleeding. He looked smaller from up here. Ronald glanced sideways at me, gauging my reaction. I didn't look away. "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. He nodded once. "On my mark," he murmured to his warriors. We closed the circle, no one in, no one out. As they slipped away to their positions, I stayed pressed against the snow, watching Trevor laugh at something one of the rogues said. The sound floated up faintly too loud, too theatrical. The same laugh he used to diffuse my anger, to make me feel foolish for ever doubting him. He had no idea the world above him was closing in. Not yet. He was not giving up. He never would. Not unless someone made him. Darkness had teeth that night. Clouds swallowed the moon, turning the mountains into a mass of shadow and shifting shapes as we made our way back to the cottage. The air was sharp with cold and the metallic tang of anticipation. Ronald walked at my side, his stride sure even on the uneven path, pack warriors fanning out around us like moving stone. Every step closer tightened the coil in my chest. This was where it had started, my shaking hands on the iron key, my fear spilling into the stone walls. It made a cruel kind of sense that it would end here too. I knew something was wrong before I saw him. The wards hummed the way they always did when we crossed them, but underneath there was a jarring, discordant note, like a plucked string gone sour. The cottage came into view, windows dark, chimney cold. No light. No welcoming glow of the hearth Ronald had made a point of keeping lit whenever I was home. Ronald's hand shot out, stopping me with a firm touch at my stomach. "Stay behind me," he murmured. A shadow moved near the porch. Then another. Wolves stepped out of the darkness, teeth bared, eyes glinting in the faint starlight. Rogues 7, 8, more sliding from between the trees, encircling the clearing like they'd been waiting. Because they had. He knew we'd come back here. He knew this place mattered. "Positions," Ronald said, voice low but carrying. His warriors shifted, some dropping seamlessly into wolf form, others staying human with weapons drawn. The air crackled. The first rogue lunged. Everything exploded. Wolves slammed into each other with bone-jarring force, snarls and yelps shredding the night. Claws tore fur, teeth found flesh. The clash of bodies echoed off the stone walls of the cottage, turning the clearing into a vortex of violence. I did what Ronald had told me to do. I stayed behind the front line. But I was not still. My magic, still raw from the fight in the forest days ago, surged in response to the chaos. It didn't care that I was afraid. It cared that people I had come to rely on were bleeding. I reached for it. The world sharpened. Each heartbeat thudded like a drum. I could feel the threads of energy running through the clearing, through the earth, through the trees, through the wolves locked in combat. I had always used those threads to soothe, to mend. Now I tugged in the opposite direction. I focused on Ronald's warriors first. I pushed strength into them, a warm rush that flowed from my chest through my hands and out into the air. It found them like it knew their names. June, with his precise strikes, Talon, with his reckless leaps, the gray she-wolf who'd nodded to me every morning. Their movements sharpened, grew surer. Wounds that would have slowed them before now stung but didn't drag them down. The rogues, I touched differently. I sent the same energy toward them but twisted, cooling it until it was a drag instead of a gift. Their muscles seemed too heavy, their steps just a fraction too slow, their vision hazy at the edges. Claws missed by inches, teeth snapped on empty air, confusion flickered in their eyes. I lifted a hand, fingers spread, and built a barrier like the one in the forest, but this time, I wasn't alone. I anchored it in the wards Ronald had laid, threading my magic through his, weaving defense into the lines that already circled the cottage. When a rogue tried to break past the edge of the fight toward the door, he hit an invisible wall and rebounded, stumbling into the path of a waiting warrior. A savage kind of satisfaction sparked in me. For once, I wasn't simply surviving. I was part of the fight. Movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. Trevor. He stood in the shadows near the woodpile, wrapped in a dark coat, half his face lit by the chaos he'd caused. He wasn't watching the battle with fear. He watched with fascination, with the detached greed of a man who believed everything in front of him was his to take. His gaze slid over the wolves and landed on me. Even from a distance, I saw his smile. "There you are," that smile said. "There's my runaway." He took a step toward me. My stomach lurched, but I didn't step back. The mate bond hummed, a thread taut between my chest and Ronald's. Even with him in wolf form somewhere in the melee, I could feel Ronald's fury, his focus, the way every part of him was tuned to the fight. Trevor clearly felt none of that. He moved along the outer edge of the clearing, skirting the worst of the chaos. He thought he'd found a gap in our defenses, a blind spot. "Ella," he called softly, voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Stop this," Come here. We'll fix it. The words hit like ghost blows, echoes of 100 arguments. For a heartbeat, I was back in our old bedroom, his fingers bruising my wrist while he told me I was overreacting. Then I remembered the letter. The rogues. The way he'd bought and sold my safety. No, I said, and the word had weight this time. His face darkened. He took another step. A black blur streaked out of the fighting. Ronald hit Trevor like a thunderbolt. 1 second, Trevor was moving toward me. The next, he was on his back in the snow, the wind knocked clean out of him, a massive wolf standing over his chest with lips peeled back from gleaming teeth. Ronald's growl shook the air, deep and lethal. For the first time that night, Trevor looked truly afraid. "Ronald," I called, forcing my voice to carry. "Don't kill him, not yet." Golden eyes flicked toward me, wild and bright, then back to the man beneath his paws. For a heartbeat, I thought he might ignore me. Then, he stepped back. He didn't let Trevor go far. He followed every scrambling move, herding him, forcing him toward the cottage door, like Trevor was just another rogue to be driven where the alpha wanted him. The battle behind us raged on, but it was shifting. The rogues faltered, some breaking and trying to flee only to find the path barred by furious blackthorn wolves. My magic held, woven into Ronald's wards like a second skin. Trevor stumbled through the doorway, tripping over the threshold. Ronald shifted mid-stride, fur melting into skin, bones reforming until the Alpha King strode into his own cottage wearing nothing but blood and command. I followed, legs shaky but determined. Inside, the great stone room was lit by dozens of candles. Ronald must have ordered lit before we left flames in sconces, on the table, along the mantel. Their light bathed the rough walls in gold, glinting off his armor where it hung on its peg, catching in the braid over my shoulder and the simple olive dress I wore. Fitting, some distant part of me thought, stitch the end of the story over the beginning. Trevor tried to regain his composure. He pushed himself upright, smoothing his coat with shaking hands, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ella," he said, breathless but patronizing. "Look at you, playing house with the monsters. This isn't you. You're confused. You always were." Ronald moved. He closed the distance in 2 strides, one hand slamming into Trevor's chest, driving him back until his shoulders hit the cold stone wall. The impact rattled the room. Ronald's fingers wrapped around Trevor's throat, not squeezing. Not yet, just reminding him how easy it would be. "The woman you have been hunting," Ronald said, his voice low and deadly calm, "belongs to no one." Trevor's eyes bulged, his hands scrabbled at Ronald's wrist, finding no give. Ronald leaned in, his face inches from Trevor's, every line of his body coiled. "She is under my protection as Alpha King," he continued. "You will leave Packlands tonight. You will never return. You will never speak her name again." Spittle flecked Trevor's lips. "You can't." "If you ever come near Ella," Ronald interrupted, his tone dropping to something that made even my wolf shiver, "I will hunt you to the ends of the earth and tear you apart. I will salt the ground you walked on. I will make sure every rogue, every pack, every human town between here and the sea knows your name as a warning, not a man." Trevor's bravado crumbled. I watched it happen, the quick calculations behind his eyes, the realization that this was not a man he could charm or manipulate or outtalk, that the rules he'd always twisted now wrapped around his neck like a noose. He nodded frantically, the movement jerky under Ronald's grip. "Say it," Ronald demanded. "I'll go," Trevor croaked. "I'll go. I won't come back. I won't say her name. I swear." Ronald studied him for a long, terrible moment, weighing the promise, the fear, the selfish instinct to survive. Finally, he released him. Trevor sagged against the wall, one hand flying to his throat, eyes wild. "Good," Ronald said, stepping back. He turned his head slightly, meeting my gaze across the room. "Now run, and never look back." For one heartbeat, Trevor hesitated. Then his survival instinct took over. He bolted. He stumbled through the door, out into the blood-scented night, past the wolves who watched him go with bared teeth and barely contained fury. No one moved to stop him. They didn't have to. Ronald's words had leashed him more effectively than any collar. I stood in the candle-lit room, heart pounding, watching the empty doorway where the man who had once owned my every breath had just fled like a whipped dog. The cottage walls seemed to exhale around me. The stone, The fire, the very air felt different. For the first time since this nightmare began, Trevor was no longer a looming inevitability. He was just a man who had been made to run. The moonstone altar looked like something carved out of a dream. It rose from the center of the clearing, a wide slab of pale stone shot through with veins that caught the moonlight and threw it back in soft, shimmering waves. Torches ringed the open space, their flames flickering gold against the dark tree line. But it was the full moon overhead that ruled the night, watching like a silent witness. I stood at the altar's edge in a gown of silver and white that caught every scrap of light and turned it into stars. The fabric whispered around my ankles when I breathed, when I shifted, when the wind moved through the clearing. My hair was braided in the old style, small moonstones woven through the plait to rest against my neck alongside the familiar weight of Mira's charm. Around us, the pack had gathered. Hundreds of wolves from across the northern territories filled the clearing and the slopes beyond, some in human skin, some in their wolf forms, all focused on the two of us. Alphas from neighboring packs stood near the front, warriors behind them, pack families clustered further back. The air buzzed with anticipation and something wilder, older, the weight of tradition settling over every heart. Ronald stood before me. He wore his formal armor, the black leather polished, the silver etching catching the firelight in sharp flashes. His dark hair hung loose around his shoulders, a contrast to the rigid discipline in the set of his shoulders. But his eyes, his amber eyes, were soft tonight, glowing with something that had nothing to do with the moon and everything to do with the way he was looking at me, like I was the only thing in this clearing that mattered. "Ella Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying easily over the gathered wolves. "Do you accept me as your mate?" The words settled over my skin like a touch. A year ago, they would have felt like a sentence. Now, they felt like a doorway. "Do you accept me?" he continued. "As your partner, your equal, your king." The old fear stirred once, a faint echo king, power, control. Then it receded beneath the weight of everything we had built in the last 6 months. The nights spent planning the Mira Foundation, the mornings we walked the borders together, not because I had to, but because I chose to. The way he had stepped back when my voice rose, the way he had listened even when I was afraid he wouldn't. "I do," I said. My voice rang clear through the clearing, stronger than I had ever heard it. The words did not taste like surrender. They tasted like a vow I was making to myself as much as to him. The pack reacted with a low, pleased murmur. A few wolves lifted their heads, eager for the coming howl. Ronald's mouth curved, slow and genuine. He took my hands in his, calloused palms enveloping my fingers with careful warmth. "Your turn," he murmured, "just for me." I drew a breath that felt like it came all the way from the day I first turned that iron key in the cottage door. "Ronald Blackthorne," I said, letting my voice carry the way his had. "Do you accept me as your mate?" The hush that fell over the clearing at those words was different, expectant, charged. Tradition allowed, even demanded, that the question be asked both ways. But from the way some of the older alphas watched us, I knew not all had stood here like this on equal ground. "Do you accept me," I continued, "as your partner, your equal, your queen?" His answering smile was bright enough to rival the torches. "I do," he replied, without hesitation. "Always." The bond snapped fully into place with those words. I had felt it growing for months, a thread tightening between us, a warmth that flared when he touched me, a steady hum whenever he was near. But now it surged, a wave of energy that crashed through my chest and into his, then rebounded, weaving us together in a pattern that felt ancient and entirely ours. I saw flashes that weren't just mine, mountain ridges from his first shift, the weight of the crown when he inherited it too young, Mira's laughter on a summer day. In return, he saw my grandmother's hands sorting herbs, the dim light of the old clinic, the moment I'd first stepped into his cottage and thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. The pack felt it too. Howls erupted around us, rising one by one until the clearing shook with the sound. Wolves in fur lifted their muzzles to the sky, voices braiding together into a single wild chorus. Those in human form tilted their heads, some letting the sound escape their throats unrestrained, others simply smiling, eyes bright. Behind me, the Mira Foundation's banner fluttered gently in the night breeze. We had built it on pack land with Ronald's backing and my stubbornness, a sanctuary for omegas and others escaping abuse, with wards as strong as any fortress and healers on staff day and night. Women and men had already begun to arrive, shaking, exhausted, but alive. I worked there most days now, teaching, healing, listening, not just patching wounds but helping people map a future. My practice had grown with it. No longer a cramped market stall or a room Trevor controlled, it now stretched across the territory. Packs sent messengers to request remedies and training. Humans from nearby towns came too, drawn by whispers of a healer who understood both worlds. I reclaimed the title healer fully, without Trevor's skepticism poisoning it. Trevor himself was far from here. Ronald's decree had not ended with that night at the cottage. Word had spread quickly through packs, through rogue channels, through the very human networks Trevor once believed made him untouchable. He had been exiled formally, his name stripped from every pack record. In some circles, it had become a warning, exactly as Ronald promised. He had not come near me since. The bond between Ronald and me thrummed, steady as my heartbeat. It didn't choke. It didn't demand. It simply was an extra spine, an extra set of lungs, a place to lean and be leaned on in turn. Ronald stepped closer, his voice dipping so only I could hear over the fading howls. "Are you happy?" he asked. The moon painted silver along the edges of his hair, catching on the faint scar at his jaw, the one I'd kissed 100 times in private and never once in public. His hands tightened around mine, not possessive, just present. I thought of the stone cottage, of the girl who had arrived there with shaking hands and a heart full of fear. I thought of the wolves who had become my family, of the survivors who now had beds and warmth and someone to believe them. I thought of Ronald's pacing footsteps in the next room on those early nights, of how they had become as comforting as any lullaby. "I am free," I said. I felt the truth of it echo through the bond, through the clearing, up into the night sky where the moon watched and, perhaps, approved. "And I am home." His eyes softened in a way I had only ever seen them do for me. He released one of my hands to wrap his arm around my waist, pulling me closer as the pack's howls shifted into cheers and applause, and the kind of chaotic celebration only wolves could manage. For the first time in a very long time, I let myself simply exist in that moment. No past chasing me, no future looming like a threat. Just moonlight, stone, the man at my side, and the life we had fought like hell to reach. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what your favorite moment in this story was: the first time Ella turned the key to the cottage, the moment Ronald faced Trevor, or the ceremony under the moon. And before you go, rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10. Your rating and feedback help shape the next dark, twisty chapter waiting to be told.